about the discovery in the body of Ramses II of tobacco. This is something that stunned the world. Ramses II was a great pharaoh who had been lying in state in the museum in Egypt for many centuries. Suddenly he developed, or over a period of time, he developed an infection in the leg. You can understand how extraordinary the African mummification must be, that it took thousands of years for him to develop an infection in his leg. This infection was eating away the mummy. They got afraid, and since France is in control of most of these things, France, many Parisian laboratories came to study the mummy of Ramses II. He was taken over to Paris. Diop said, when they took off the cover, he saw Ramses II. Ramses II was very black. When they brought him back home, he was pale. They put so much gamma rays in that mummy that they turned him pale. Diop said, in spite of all of that, it would still be possible to test him, to give him the melanin dosage test. But some strange thing happened. And I unwittingly had something to do with it, because Diop wrote me and says, they have found tobacco in the belly of Ramses II. And he said to me in a letter which is published in this new journal, that proves that you are right. Not only the Egyptians come to America, but they came back bringing the tobacco. And I wrote him and says, no. Here you are likely to be making a mistake, because even though people have argued for centuries that tobacco is American, it is not. I have shown in my book, which at that time, he was writing in 1980. My book did not come out in France until 1981. So he had only read pieces of my book. He had not read the French edition of the book. And I said, when the French edition comes out, you are to look very closely at the chapter on tobacco, because I have shown that tobacco is not American. There is an African tobacco and there's an American tobacco, and that in fact the word tobacco comes from tubac, which comes from dubac, which is a Syrian word for viscum glue, and the viscosity of the tobacco plant led the Syrians to call it dubac, and then it was changed to tubac, and it led to words like tuba, taba, tawa, tama, and that is what came over, so that the Americans started to call not the tobacco plant, for which they had a name since they had a tobacco plant, they called the pipe tobacco. And they called the act of smoking with the mouth, which was new to them, tobacco. So that could be an African tobacco. So use your laboratory, because Diop was the founder and maker of the radiocarbon laboratory in Dakar. Since his death, I think it was last month, the government of Senegal decided to call it the Sheikh Anta Diop Institute rather than the radiocarbon laboratory. It is now named after him. But he could not do this because nobody would allow him to touch the tobacco. But nevertheless, he informed people in Egypt and in France that I had raised the question that they should test the tobacco to see if indeed it is like American tobacco. Do you know, after the test was performed, everybody got quiet? There were 48 laboratories involved, and none of them published reports. And do you know what they said? They stopped studying Ramses II, and then the rumor went around that they got the wrong mummy. In other words, either they discovered that that was an African tobacco, not like the American, which means it upset all the arguments, or they discovered it was American, which meant that there's a possibility that the Egyptians brought it back from America in an early time, which upset them even more. So either way, they got caught, so they shut up. That was the end of the matter. We never heard again about Ramses II. Nothing has been published about it.
So this is not about making history Afrocentric, but by understanding and having all available information out for everyone to be able to study, and how politics play a part in shutting down the discovery of actual and true history. We know that these types of things happen because no one in the Western world would want to accept the fact that prior to Columbus, that Egyptians sailed to the Americas. Now, it was proven by the voyage of Thor II that an Egyptian-style vessel can make it across the Atlantic. Now, is it profitable for Egypt to sell that far, considering that they have to go from the almost farthest end of the Mediterranean all the way to the Americas? Is it a profitable situation? Probably not. But the fact that it can be done, and with this mummy of Ramses having tobacco in his system, and as well as many other mummies have been found to have cocaine, cannabis, cocoa, as well as tobacco in their system, it could be an indicator that the Egyptians did sell to the Americas. Now, according to this gentleman, it is possible that the tobacco plant originated in Africa. On the west coast of Africa, in Namibia, there is a plant called Nicotina africana. Now, Nicotina africana is different than American tobacco, to which, as a cigar smoker, one thing I do know is that if you take seeds from a tobacco plant, i.e. Cuba, and then you plant it in Nicaragua, you are not necessarily smoking a Cuban cigar. You are smoking a Cuban seeded Nicaraguan cigar, because the land will change how the plant grows and the aspects of the plant. So with Nicotina africana being indigenous to Namibia, it is possible that the Western Africans sailed to the Americas and brought the tobacco seed, or you would have to say that the Western Africans went to the Americas and brought the American seed, but this was not tested to identify which had happened. But you have to take one or the other. We do have examples of the people of Ghana going and trading gold with the people in the Americas, as said in either in Columbus Journal or his cousin's journal. They had the gold tipped spears, and they tested those spears, and it is the exact same gold that is found in Ghana, which would suggest that the Guyanese people traded with the people in the Central Americas and in the Caribbean. And since the Atlantic tide, not tide, waterway, I can't think of what the actual term is, the current goes from West Africa to the Caribbean, it splits and go north, or you can split and go south. The strongest current goes south, and it goes south down South America, and then towards the bottom of Brazil, it flows back over into West Africa, and guess where it hits? Right in Namibia. So it is possible, it is possible that they traded with the natives, especially since there's gold, the same Guyanese gold was found there. Now, then there were others who would say that the ships that the Africans were building in West Africa could not have made it. Now, we do have the story of the predecessor of Mansa Musa, that the reason that Mansa Musa became king is because his predecessor, after a voyage that one ship returned, when they hit the Atlantic River, set off with 300 ships, but never returned, which could be a reason why in Columbus's journal, as well as Cortez's journal, they said that there were large black men who were there with the natives, which would also indicate that Mansa Musa's predecessor possibly made it there and became a part of that culture. Are they the Olmecs? It's possible. But there is enough evidence to suggest that more studies should be done concerning whether or not Africans traded with the people in the Americas prior to Columbus, because it is certainly possible based on tobacco, cocaine, cocoa, and cannabis. There's enough evidence, and if they didn't, then you would have to then say that the West Africans may have traded with them, may have brought that plant, but then the plant spread through Africa up into Egypt, which would say that Egypt had contact with sub-Saharan Africa, which is one of the things they tried to say, that they only had contact with East Africa, and that's it. So there's a lot in history that is pushed down in order to continue the narrative of Western expansion and Western exploration, and all credit going to those people. But I've sailed across the Atlantic. It is very possible for a small boat to get across the Atlantic.